What is conformity and nonconformity? Conformity. Action in accord with prevailing social standards, attitudes, practices, etc. Correspondence in form, nature, or character. Nonconformity. Failure or refusal to conform, as with established customs, attitudes, or ideas. Lack of conformity or agreement.
In order to get our findings, we conducted interviews and asked multiple people questions about conformity and nonconformity through the lenses of art, history, math, and science.
Okay, through our interviews concerning art and dance, we asked 3 questions. How important is it to conform or not to conform in art and dance? What elements play a factor in our decisions to conform or not to conform? And how does our culture identity affect those decisions?
Conforming in dance is important depending on the situation you're in. So if you're in a group, like take the senior team for example, you have to conform with each other's styles in group dances in order to get better. But as an individual, it's also important to have your own style, so not necessarily trying to copy anyone else or conforming in an individual sense.
When you see someone that might be scoring better than you or might be doing things that you want to be able to do, you conform to what they're doing because you think it'll get you further in dance. But same thing as in a group, you conform more than you do when you're alone.
In dance, elements, a lot of it is peer pressure, but also just seeing the girls around you on a daily basis, seeing how they dress, seeing how they act. A lot of popular trends that somebody will start in the studio catches on, and eventually everyone will do it.
I have some examples, like one person at our studio got the pair of black and white Nikes, and then right after everybody got the black and white Nikes, or like someone will start wearing a certain brand of leggings and everybody will start wearing that certain brand of leggings, and it's a lot of, you feel like you need to look the same as the people around you to be noticed as much in dance, even though sometimes it's the opposite. But I also feel like some elements that attribute to not conforming is when you want to stick out more and you're confident in yourself. So I feel like having less confidence sometimes brings you to conform to other people.
Dance, I feel like dance as a whole is a culture in itself, and the people in it, not even just the people in our studio, but everyone in the dance world, we kind of all have similar stories to tell, similar experiences, because dance is an art, so it's really easy to share art with other people.
From our interviews, we found that you conform in a learning situation because you don't know how to do everything yet. We also found that we conform with others in the certain fads of those time periods, and we made a realization that nonconformity is the most praised, yet it's the least practiced.
From these interviews, we learned that in art and dance, we normally conform to what is praised or what people think is beautiful in that time period. We do this because we naturally want everything that we do to be praised the same way, so that's why we conform. However, it is a two-way street because the most praised are normally the ones who don't conform. So it makes it a hard situation to decide if you're going to conform or not conform. So that is one difficulty we found when we were collecting our data.
Okay, so from our history interviews, we asked 3 questions. How important is conforming or not conforming in history? Is conformity an all or nothing concept? And how does our cultural identity affect our decisions to conform or not conform?
You know, I think a kind of a bigger overarching question that kind of covers all of that is identity. Is from where do we derive identity? Do we derive it from, from something within us, from something that's larger than a group? And I think if you know yourself, then this conformity versus non-conformity becomes ultimately a non-issue.
Well, I guess if you look at history, conforming is in various aspects. One would be democracy. It could even go as shallow as clothes. For example, clothes changed over time dramatically. There's always two sects of people, but they always were wearing generally the same thing. If one guy was wearing greased up hair, everybody was wearing greased up hair in that area. If you went on a higher scale, as I said, democracy, you could go with the waging of war, how we tried to instill democracy into everything. We tried to force democracy on everybody, and obviously it hasn't turned that well.
In my experience, no. I find it to be a fluid concept. It can even be a day by day, hour by hour, because I think as humans, we should always be bringing in new information. And with new information should come new consideration. I'm going to conform to the mores of this particular group, and then all of a sudden, you realize that there's a rather important aspect of this group that doesn't fit your identity. Kind of going back to what I was talking about before, and so you kind of break out of that conformity.
As of today, our cultural identity is basically based almost on all social media aspects between Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Anything like that. It makes us conform to things. If you look at something on Instagram and you want it, you're going to buy it and you're going to share it with everybody else, and everybody else is going to want to see it. And that's the conformity part of it. That would be my cultural identity. Our cultural identity is based on our technology and how it changes how we live, and it changes how we act, and it changes what we do.
From our interviews, we have found that we conform in 3 ways. One is through our clothes. One is through our past mistakes and finding solutions to those mistakes. And we also conform in the rules that we follow. We have also found that we go along with what is popular in today's society so that we can fit in or be socially accepted.
And on our findings is that history gives us a basis to be a nonconformist.
Throughout history, we find we conform in different situations, but looking back on it, we should have not conformed because that would have been the morally right thing to do.
In our interviews, we asked these 3 questions. How important is not conforming or conforming in our world, and how do you know in relation to math? How do we qualify important? Is this a universal field or is it a variable? And how does experience play a role in your decision to conform or not conform in math?
I think that conforming in math is very important because first, to build off of what you know, you have to follow basic rules, and that's how math is taught and used.
Well, in a math class, there's always a right answer. So with that being said, you have to conform because you have to get the right answer. And we mark you wrong on a test if you don't get the right answer. So in that sense, there's a large aspect of conformity in a math class. However, sometimes when you're doing problems, there's more than one way to do the problem, and you can get the same solution as somebody else, even if they did it differently. So you don't have to conform always in the way that you do the math, but the final answer has to be the correct answer, and then so there you get your conforming it. Well, to be honest, it comes from our curriculum, which is the Common Core curriculum, which is a national curriculum. It also comes from the state of Michigan and what they expect. Like, they require all students to take Algebra 2. So they're telling us that math classes up through Algebra 2 are important. The teachers, though, we do think about what we think is best for students, and we do align our curriculum so that we're teaching what we feel is the best math for students to receive. But we typically have to conform to what the state and the national curriculum is.
I think that math has shown me how following basic laws and rules to create a basis of knowledge is important, and that before you can build and elaborate off that, you need to conform.
Well, to be honest, when I was a first or second year teacher, I just would conform. I would conform to what I was told to teach by the state of Michigan. We were given benchmarks, and that's what we taught. But after being here for 16 years, I have a little bit more expertise and more experience in the math, and I feel like I have a working knowledge of what I feel like is important, what kids need to go on to college, and what their careers are going to be, and then I can modify it from there.
So from these interviews, we found that in math, you are encouraged to conform during the learning stage and find the right answer. And in math, there's always going to be one right answer.
The nonconformity part of math comes in during the process of finding that right answer and conforming to that answer. There are many ways to get to that answer, and once you have experience in that subject, this one being math, you're able to non-conform.
We agree with all these findings, and a lot of these ideas are present in science.
In our natural science interviews, we ask these 3 questions. How important is conforming or non-conforming in natural science, and how do you know? How do we qualify important in natural sciences? And how does experience play a role in your decision to conform or not conform in natural science?
There's conformity within like the scientific process, so that's a way to conform, but the role of science is to kind of challenge what we kind of understand and to find new ways of understanding our world. So it's kind of a mixture, I guess. But when you're challenging that system, you need to stay within the bounds of what's accepted as science. So that would be considered conforming.
Well, you asked me to answer the question through the lens of natural science, but I don't want to conform to that. So I'm going to answer it in a different lens. I'm going to answer the question in terms of school, because I think we do something pretty interesting. We reward kids throughout their school process. So from the time they're 5 until they're 18, we reward them for being conformists. And then we send them to college. And then after that, we send them out into the real world. And when we talk to those people out there at innovative businesses, they are all wanting kids that don't necessarily conform to a status quo. So I think that there's this interesting discrepancy between what we are doing in school and allowing kids to be conformist or forcing them to be, and what the world is saying that we need.
Important data or important findings would be things that change understanding of that field.
I think importance is a relative question. I think that's one of those perception is reality kind of questions. And I think important is unique to each person, and it all depends on which stage of life you are in. And
It might help you know what questions to ask, or maybe where to look for new questions. Experience is definitely going to be helpful in the types of questions you ask and how you guide your research and maybe the avenues you go down.
I think for me, it's the experience of failure. And I was raised in kind of a situation where the right answer wasn't necessarily always the best thing. It was the process, and I was not afraid to fail. And that confidence and that ability to try new things, even if they're not going to work, I think is what kind of makes me a little bit of a nonconformist.
From our findings, we found that we conform in the learning process to get things right, especially in labs. Once we find that learning basis, we can explore it on our own.
When we non-conform in science, it's because of our learning that allows us to have a basis of things that are already found.
Okay. So from these interviews, we now think that science is a topic where you form a basis that you can form upon, but then it gets to a point where you can expand from that basis, which is the non-conformity portion. But eventually, the non-conforming comes to a stop and everybody starts conforming to what you are doing, and there will not be any more non-conformity until we start to push the boundaries again and think of new ideas.
So from our interviews and findings, we decided to ask ourselves the question, how are the findings applied in our lives? And for me personally, the art findings apply in my life because I'm a dancer, and so there are times when I have to conform when we are doing our group dances for competition, but then again, there's also times when I'm allowed to not conform when we are in the leaps and turns class and doing combos, and we have the freedom to express ourselves any way that we want to.
For me, having taken a lot of math and science classes, I definitely find connections with our findings in my life. Especially in math and science class, the first thing we are taught is the basics, and then we take that and we can explore and we can non-conform while finding the right answer, and I find that that's definitely true.
Through the lens of history, I have found our findings to be accurate, and I agree with them. They apply in my life because I usually do conform, but now from history class, I usually try to change things that I feel that are morally wrong.